This review of Castlevania The Adventure ReBirth may contain spoilers and coarse language. If neither of those bother you, then have fun watching and enjoying this review. Sometimes we have to remind ourselves of the dead. Long live the Wii Shop channel and taking tons of games with it. Yeah, that sucks. Case in point, Castlevania The Adventure ReBirth, a 2009 remake of the Castlevania adventure on Game Boy. What better time to play a Christian-themed game on a Christian holiday? Well, there's no time like the present. This remake boasts tons of interesting paths, unique level design, and outstanding music, but can it live up on its own? Let's find out, starting with the story. It starts out by telling you the adventure of Trevor Belmont, a la Castlevania 3, with it finally concluding and starting the story of Christopher Belmont, a descendant of Trevor, taking on the famous Whip, the vampire killer, and taking siege on Dracula's evil army to stop him and said army. Simple, has a little backstory, that's all you really need. I don't have any proper complaints about this besides the lack of it being super grandiose, but you don't really need it in this kind of game. Oh well, like John Carmack says, porn and video games have the same storyline. You're there for the gameplay. Gameplay. Yes. Plowing through this game, you're the shining knight Christopher Belmont, on his family crusade to rid the world of Dracula and his evil. Christopher isn't that much different than Trevor or Simon in regards to controls in the previous Castlevania games. He can jump, whip, and upgrade his whip. He does, however, have the ability to control his jumps mid-air, which can lead to some trickier platforming sections, but nothing too crazy. When his whip is fully upgraded, Christopher can fire out of his whip, giving you some extra range for a limited amount of time. Christopher also has the classic Castlevania sub-weapons, such as the Holy Water, a stationary damage dealer, the Axe, an arcing projectile, the Knife, a horizontal projectile, and the Cross, a horizontal boomerang projectile, and finally, the Stopwatch, which freezes time for enemies and objects while you quickly move. All these wonderful sub-weapons make their return in this game, but don't come with their own button, relying once again on up and attack to perform moves, making it a pain to perform it on stairs. That's Castlevania for you. Regardless of that, Christopher controls pretty solid, and that's a big plus. So is this. One thing that is annoying though is that some improvements in other games aren't present here, such as how if you lose an item, you don't get the chance to pick it back up like in Rondo of Blood. A rather annoying thing, but nothing game-ruining. This game also has a more noticeable time limit, that, while present in the classic games, wasn't as seemingly scary as it is in this game. Some bosses can get you down to the clutch, and it's bizarre how they do. Except actually, it's pretty obvious, they just make it a certain amount when you're at a certain checkpoint, so... Okay. Level design in this game is traditional Castlevania. Very blocky, but not to a fault. Lots of small paths, purely horizontal or vertical scrolling, classic down to the T. The main noticeable oversight though is that some of these stages near the end are very long. The thing is, these stages are paced really well, and I didn't find it to be a problem, but some of you might. There's plenty of single level gimmicks that are introduced well in this game, such as rotational gimmicks in the Clockwork stage, where you have to rotate stairs to walk up them. One thing this game uses is keys. Keys are a system that are not new to the series, but how they're used in this game is pretty interesting. Keys can be held for any moment of time, but are expunged when you find a gate. Said gate can either lead to a goodie room or a new path. This encourages some replayability to see how you can save the key for yourself. A great stage that uses this is Stage 4, where there's 2 gates and 2 keys. Once you save them both, you can go on a secret path that lets you skip the mini-boss. Stuff like that is super killer for replayability. Stage 4 itself, however, is a bit annoying to play through, due to a lot of it being doors that you have to go in and out of, but you'll understand it once you play through it for a bit, and it becomes more traditional at the end. One thing I don't like is that Stage 6 is just Dracula. There's no level, you just go straight to Dracula. I am not a fan of doing that, but the Vampire Killer remix in this is great. We're not getting into the music yet though, just hold on a bit for that. Because, that's gonna be something. One point of criticism is how hard they went into hiding health from you. Pork chops are pretty common at the beginning of the game, being in obvious places and easy to accidentally find. Though near the end of the game, that's a different picture. Pork chops near the end of the game are in extremely obscure and weird places. There's no way you'd be able to find half of these just by playing regularly. This makes the last levels way harder than they need to be, just because of how hidden these pork chops are. These stages also have a lot of great enemy placements. Castlevania games are usually pretty good at putting enemies in the right places, and this one is no exception. Putting them in direct arcs never really feel out of reach with weapons. None of the enemies are extremely original, as a lot of them are from the original adventure, but they behave well and have some interesting patterns that are fun to figure out. Some of them are on the easier side to defeat, which is how most Castlevania games are, with some obvious exceptions. Bosses, on the other hand, are pathetic. You don't get a beefy challenge until you get to death, but they're very easy to figure out and spam attacks to. I'm actually kind of impressed that the bosses are so weak because they're all extremely cool ideas, but the ways to exploit them are unbelievably easy. I will say that despite the bosses being easy, they are fun to fight against, simply due to trying to rush through them as quickly as you can. Death in particular is a really fun ride, partially due to his phases and the usage of projectiles. Dracula himself too, with all of his phases, are also really fun. The big boy Drac himself is pretty predictable in the first two phases, but the last phase is a challenge of its own. Man, that is an absolute ride to fight against. Now, this game does come with some alternative ways to play. For instance, there are easy and hard modes in case the game is too easy or too challenging for you. Hard mode definitely is what the name implies. There are many more enemies that show up even earlier than they're supposed to, along with level design changes and damage increases. It's an actually tough mode. I had a really difficult time with this one. Easy mode features the exact same level design, but it also gets rid of knockback from enemies. Enemies do less damage to you, and you also start every level with 30 hearts. Now, what's also interesting is the fact that there's a player option for how the game should be played, with normal or classic. Normal is how the regular game works, all the controls and everything are there, but classic mode makes the game play similarly to the original adventure. Ergo, it gets rid of 3 of the sub-weapons, restricting you only to the cross and holy water, even though the adventure didn't have sub-weapons, it's using the sequels. Locks your midair jump controls, and also adds some interesting properties, like how you can't block projectiles behind you like you can in normal, or that when you hit a ceiling, you lose all your momentum, similar to the classic games, but in this, it's annoying. Primarily because there are actually some parts that are fuck hard just to get through because of that annoying ceiling resetting quirk. However, the worst possible thing is that due to there only being 2 weapons, and the level design not fucking changing, classic mode is classic in the belief of stupid assholes who think the original NES games are too hard would think. Gimped, shitty level design, and shitty enemy placement. Well, the problem is that accurately describes the original adventure because it's a piece of fucking garbage. But that doesn't mean you should add a mode that's garbage too. Why don't they make it even shittier? Like have the game run at half the frame rate and have lots of slowdown. Also, cut the last level so that there's only 4. Avoid classic mode. I love the locked jumps, but all the other garbage that comes with it fucking sucks. Graphics for this game really do the right job. This game has the graphics equivalent of an early Saturn or PlayStation 1 game, which isn't a detrimental thing. It does obviously take advantage of the hardware it's using and use a lot of more unique things that the NES or Super Nintendo games wouldn't have, such as scaling, rotation, distortion of sprites, and transparency. A great example of these would be the saw blades in level 3, which both rotate and scale to make sure that you can go under them. Wonderful things such as the classic Castlevania strut are wonderfully animated in this game, and the attention to detail is stunning to say the least. Tons of effects such as rains, clouds, gears moving in the background. It's a very pretty game. For audio, ReBirth, simply put, is a giant Castlevania fan service game. There are so many elements audio-wise that make this game feel like just a traditional Konami game. A great example is the pause sound. It's the exact same sound as Konami's pause sound on Genesis games, post Rocket Knight Adventures. effects have incredible thought and design put into them. There's echoing in caves, there's footsteps when climbing upstairs, there's really satisfying hit sounds and different hit sounds depending on the type of whip. It's just crazy how stunning these sound effects really are. There's a lot of attention to detail put into them. Holy fuck! The music in this game, incredible. The entire soundtrack to this game, while unoriginal, has some fancy music with strange retro tunings to it. I don't know if the composer used something to mimic a Yamaha 2612 chip, which is the chip the Sega Genesis used, but it sounds incredible regardless. It's just unbelievable that this game not only remixes classic Castlevania music, but uses music that probably nobody's ever even heard of before. The most amazing thing to come out of this is that there are remixes of songs so obscure, they use the load music from the X68000 version of Castlevania as a fucking stage theme. That is really weird is that despite being a remake of the adventure, it doesn't feature any songs from that game. There is an unused version of Battle of the Holy, which should be used, though it seems they cut it out before release for some reason. That doesn't make sense. It's Christopher Belmont's theme. Okay, yeah, it sucks balls that it's not in it, but that doesn't mean that the songs that are there suck. All of these songs are amazing remixes. And every single time you start a level in this game, it plays the beginning of Vampire Killer. And you never think that it's gonna turn into Vampire Killer until it does. This game, without a doubt, has a fantastic soundtrack. No doubt in my mind, this is a really, really A+ soundtrack. The best part about that Vampire Killer intro is that it actually syncs up with the stage intro's animation. That is great attention to detail. Oh yeah, also there's some voice acting in the game, and it sounds pretty nice.
As ever, the ally of worthless humans.
The person who did Dracula was pretty good at it. The other characters aren't much to write off about, but, you know, I gotta say, they're pretty good. Whew. Alright, well, that leaves us with changes. What exactly would I change to this game? Well, for starters, the bosses need some more complex behavior. Many of them are stationary meatbags that can be whipped to death, and that's just not that fun. The main issue with these bosses is they're just so predictable. There's no such thing as left field with these bosses. Obviously, some more attacks would be the best thing, maybe even some elements of randomness, like which attack they'll do next. With level design, it's best if the pork chops are in certainly easier to find places. Later enemies really wipe the floor with you, and even the earlier classic Vania games were more lenient on pork chop placement than this one is. In that regard, I think it would be great to put them in easier to find places, along with having pork chops being more common on key paths. For controls, I think some work is in order. I said before that you couldn't go up and pick previously lost items, but having it so that you could would be a great thing. Same with stairs. It would be nicer if Christopher could just jump onto them and start climbing. That was something 4, Rondo, and Bloodlines all had, so if it's trying to be like those games, I don't understand why they didn't take that from them. Same thing that most of those games had was being able to use an item as a separate button. No excuses for that one, Konami. All these damn options, and none of them to make one of the binds an item. Fuck you! Classic mode should also just be the lack of air controls when jumping and no back protection when you're whipping behind you. No item gimping allowed. That does not make the game fun. I was originally thinking, what if they remade the original levels with the tiles from other levels? Then I realized the adventure had shitty level design, so no thanks. I also would have reinstated Battle of the Holy as the first stage's song. I don't understand why it went unused, since, you know, it's Christopher Belmont's theme. Heck, I even think I'd remake some of the other stuff like Death Fair. That was a great song in the adventure. Another big thing I'd add is a level select. For some reason when... Oh, there is one. Well, I'd add some proper fucking context for it then. Nobody's gonna know that you have to hold right for several seconds to access it. Another minor thing, when the final form of Dracula is making the electric balls spawn after raising his hands, it would be nice for them to be in specific spots instead of it being in a random spot that can be overlaid with a different attack. And those are approximately all the changes I would like to make to this game. So overall, Castlevania The Adventure Rebirth is a great game. Not amazing, not the best Classicvania, as it has some obvious faults, but playing on normal with normal controls is fun. Classic mode, no. Hard mode, ooh, wow. Admittedly, while I couldn't call it the best, it's certainly one I'd recommend you checking out when you get a chance. Well, since you can never buy the game again, I guess there's only one shady and possibly not legal way to get it. Wow, digital only really is the only way to go. Anyway, hopefully you'll be able to play this game at some point. It's a fun one, and I'm sure you'd like it. If it's ever an issue, set it to easy mode and crank up the lives. But I think this is a good one, and I think even newcomers will enjoy this one.